All right, I think you've waited long enough. It's time for part 2 of our look at cross-development. In this episode, we go in-depth with Qt Creator.
We're going to get started with the in-depth look in just a second, but first a quick word from our sponsor, GoDaddy.
That's right, everybody. Out there, if you use our codes Linux, you'll save 10% off any order at GoDaddy.com. And if you use the code Linux20, that's LINUX20, you'll save 20% off shared hosting. Now, we really appreciate it when you use those codes Linux and Linux20 because it helps us out by giving support to our sponsor, which helps us keep producing these shows.
And it keeps us being able to buy things like new cables because we seem to be having every cable we have fail on us. So we really need
epic
to be able to get the sound into the computer internet combination.
That's a good call, Brian.
It is a good
call. So when you use those codes, it helps us do that. All right, let's get into Qt Designer, Creator, whatever it is.
Right.
When we did part 1 of our discussion on cross-development, we've had a lot of suggestions from all of you out there.
A ton of suggestions.
We're going to get to a lot of those later, but in this one, we're going to touch on one of the, probably one of the higher amount of suggestions we've gotten, something we should look at. And it was something you were already planning to look at.
Right. So,
and it's kind of big news now.
It's big news. So just this month, Qt Software, the guys who used to be called Trolltech, I think they might still be called Trolltech, they got bought by Nokia, and so now they're Qt Software, part of Nokia.
Right.
But whatever they are, they're creating some really cool stuff. And they've released their first real big integrated cross-platform development environment called Qt Creator or Qt
What's
Creator.
an integrated cross-platform? Integrated means it looks native to that environment that
No,
you're developing for?
Not at all. An integrated development environment is basically taking all the tools that you're using, or at least the majority of them, to create the software and puts it into one application interface that lets you just kind of create it all in one.
Gotcha.
A great example is if you're a Linux developer, a lot of people are very used to creating GNOME applications based on GTK, where you use an application like Glade to design the UI, to place the buttons where you want them on a given screen, on the window. And then you go in a separate application to edit your code. And then you load up your command line and your compiler and all these sorts of things. A nice integrated development environment is all those all in one. You have one application with your UI layout, you drag your buttons all around, and you edit your code within it, you set your project settings, all that all in one place.
Okay. That makes sense.
Very, very handy. It's something that most development environments have been doing for a long time on the Windows side, Visual Studio and whatnot.
Okay. All right, I'm with you. So this is version 4
of Qt Creator.
Or this is brand new.
This is brand new.
Okay.
So Qt Creator has never existed before.
And it just
It was birthed from the awesomeness over at Trolltech
so
Nokia.
This is their first
This is
stab.
brand new. So this came out with Qt 4.5. And Qt 4.5, for those of you who aren't familiar, Qt, of course, or Qt, I'm going to just say Qt because it's spelled QT.
Word, Brian.
And that doesn't say cute. That just says QT.
Right.
Plus, if I say cute, that's like me going around saying, hey, have you seen this new cute software? That's like almost like it's got like ponies and strawberries drawn on it.
And rainbows.
I'm not into ponies and strawberries and rainbows. I like my software to look harsh and uninviting and like filled with brimstone and hellfire.
I'd say that's a bad call.
All right, so so Qt is a framework, the general framework that allows people to develop an application that looks good and has a lot of functionality on Linux, Windows, OS 10, Windows mobile devices, all Nokia internet tablets.
Yeah.
A lot of different devices support, or I guess Qt is supported on a lot of different devices and platforms.
Okay.
So it makes it a great option for developing cross-platform software. And there's a lot of great examples out there of software that does it. Even embedded devices are utilizing it quite extensively.
That's what surprised me. Some of the devices when I was looking on the Qt Creator's website is, like the Roku Netflix device. If you've heard of that before, that actually uses Qt for its interface. And there's a few other just standard internet or not even internet connected devices that all are using Qt, which you would never even realize.
You really would. And there's a lot of applications that utilize it. And of course, most famously in some cases is the fact that KDE is written on top of Qt.
And also LucasArts puts out a lot of their their mastering software, and it's
right,
all
the rendering tools.
It's
and
all done in Qt.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that I mean, that's impressive.
Skype is written in Qt. At least I know. At least the Linux version for sure is. And so it's very great, and it's been great for a long time. What really changed though is this year they've gone ahead and released Qt 4.5, which is just better than the old versions. It has a lot more things like full integrated WebKit and a lot of other things that you can use across every platform that Qt supports. But they also changed the licensing. So now, in previous years, you've been able to say get a commercial license for Qt,
right?
Which you had to pay for, and then you could release commercial applications for Qt, or you get a GPL license,
right?
And release GPL software.
But if you wanted,
there was no real in between. There was
so
no
if you
way
want to do
jump
commercial
into it.
pay for software,
right?
You had to get a license from Trolltech,
or even just closed source software or these various things.
Okay.
So now there is an LGPL license version of Qt, which means that you can, if you're just a hobbyist, jump into to Qt development at no cost to yourself and without any obligation really to release your software
so
open source.
that clears that barrier. But now what would
it opens it up to everybody.
What would be a reason I would want to use Qt and now Qt Designer? Because
Creator.
Right, Qt Creator. Sorry.
Yeah, forgiven.
I don't know. I guess I don't realize. It seems like if this is a new kid on the block, the creator is. Right. I know Qt's been around for a long time.
It's been around forever.
But if the creator, if the IDE, is that the right term?
Yes.
If the IDE is just kind of new, why am I wasting my time with it?
Because it's good. Quite frankly, it's because it's good and because it comes from a group of people who are renowned for developing very quality stuff.
Nokia?
The folks behind Qt, the Qt software guys.
Okay.
They do amazing work and it's quality. I mean, they build all of KDE on top of this stuff.
Right.
And a lot of other applications as well.
But sometimes, you know me, I'm not a big fan of the KDE interface, and that has nothing to do with Qt itself.
That's nothing to do with Qt
That's just
itself.
design choice they've made.
That's just design things.
I mean, it's okay.
Right.
It's just sometimes it's not my favorite.
We'll get into KDE another day. So one of the things here, though, is with Qt Creator, so let's say whether you're experienced or new to software development, Qt Creator is fairly easy to jump into. They did a very nice job. I highly recommend. Go to qtsoftware.com, all one word. Take a look at some of the videos and screenshots there. Some of the videos are very, very cheesy. Guys at Qt Software, get a hold of us because some of those look ridiculous.
Not that we're like amazing.
The software
or anything, but
is freaking amazing and looks stellar.
The video demos, not so
a little
great.
corny. No offense to the Qt Software devs who are doing the videos, but but anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that the interface of the Qt Creator IDE itself is high quality stuff.
Okay.
In fact, when you start looking at what it can accomplish and how easy it is to jump into it, it's very impressive. You've got to compare it against what else is available out
there. Well, I had
there.
asked you earlier before the show. I'm like, not that we'd necessarily want to use Visual Studio, but it's fairly well respected for being a complete development environment.
Right.
Now, I said, is it on par with Visual Studio?
Yes, absolutely.
And that seems amazing for their first run out of the box, because Visual Studio has been around in some incarnation for a long time.
Forever. Now, I mean, and this is a fair thing to compare it with.
Wow.
Now, for those of you, even the open source advocates out there, if you're a professional software developer, odds are at some point you've been developing software with Visual Studio, even if you didn't like it,
right?
Even if you ran away from it
So
screaming.
the job required it.
A job requires it. Some client will need it, something. And Visual Studio does offer a lot of features and a lot of great features. And so when other IDEs are developing cross-platform or single-platform development tools, they really got to look to Visual Studio to see, well, how do I one-up that?
Right.
How do I do it even better?
And you think they've done that?
In most cases. So what we really have to say here is, so Visual Studio is for Windows.
And how much does Visual Studio cost?
Oh, like $1,000 or so.
And Qt Creator is free.
Right.
Okay.
So now you
and Visual Studio will only produce software for Windows.
Kind of, sort of.
Or .NET software.
We'll get into Visual Studio in a later video because I want to get into that as well. But with Visual Studio, you can, of course, create C#.NET applications for older versions of .NET that will run in Mono for Linux and Windows as well. But it's not really what it was meant for. The thing with Qt Creator is it was built from the beginning with the idea that you're going to make software for Linux, for Windows, for OS X, and supposedly, according to Qt Software, coming soon for mobile devices as well. And when they say coming soon, they actually are saying the next couple of months.
Wow.
The development on this has obviously been rapid. The look and feel is great. It's very simple to dive into this. If you want to create a new application that's a web browser, there's a demo video on qtsoftware.com, and I highly recommend you check it out, of creating your own WebKit-based web browser.
That'd be cool.
Inside Qt 4.5.
Basically make our own version
and
of Chrome.
It takes like 4 minutes to get the basics working. I mean, it's for the most part some drag and drop, and you write
so
like 4 or 5 lines
okay, now
of
let
code.
me ask you this. So if you're completely green, never written a line of code, maybe HTML. Does that count?
I see where you're going.
Could you start with Qt Creator?
Yes, it's going to be rough though. The problem is Qt is really all about C++.
Okay.
C++ is not the easiest language to cut your teeth on.
Right.
Hell, C can be not that friendly of a language to cut your teeth on. Most people are going to recommend things like Python, Ruby, whether I like it or not, Visual Basic and Visual Basic.net.
Okay.
These sorts of languages are going to be a little more Pascal, even be a little friendlier to learn on. However, if you know at least some software development, if you develop in any language before, C++ is not terribly difficult to pick up. And you don't need to know the ins and outs of C++ to be able to create a cool application with a WebKit view embedded and a cool list of things and a few database connections and these sorts of things. There's also built-in, the great thing about this is because it's built on Qt and utilizes Qt 4.5, there are things like the ability to use OpenGL and all sorts of things within your application.
So you don't have to know how to do OpenGL stuff necessarily.
Well, you kind of do, but here's doing a lot of very cutting edge stuff. It's not necessarily cutting edge now, but doing OpenGL and working with embedded browsing and things like that that are usually in most cross-platform IDEs considered
very specific to that platform.
Specific to the platform,
a lot
and
of tricks.
Advanced.
And they totally just take that whole abstraction layer away.
It's gone.
That's nice.
You just write your code once. It's going to work on all three.
Now, is that any different though
platforms.
than say like something real basic could do?
Very different, actually. The amount of features that Qt 4.5 offers and that is accessible through Qt Creator, the IDE, is insane. Quite simply, it is mind-bogglingly awesome.
Really?
How many features are in here? I mean, it boggles the mind. I highly recommend you go to qtsoftware.com.
That's impressive.
What they've created here is really phenomenal. Doing layout and...
I'm looking at screenshots right now, and it looks good.
It looks great, and I've been working with it for the past few weeks since release, and it is phenomenal.
All right, so let me ask you this.
So I've done a fair bit of software development with MonoDevelop, and MonoDevelop is phenomenal, and we'll get into MonoDevelop in one of the upcoming episodes. However, this blows MonoDevelop away in terms of raw features. The debugging within it is phenomenal. The UI layout is phenomenal. The amount of features that are immediately exposed to you is astounding. And it's much easier to develop an application that is... And it is easier to distribute that application on multiple platforms. Then with Mono, you've got to distribute
the Mono,
just so much
the Mono runtime,
and you've got to develop against a UI framework. Either it's going to be WinForms, in which case it doesn't look native on Linux and Windows, or it's GTK, in which case it doesn't look really native on OS X.
But like in your case, if you're writing software with a target audience of Linux, but then you decide, well, I want to make this app available for Windows and for Mac. If I'm on a Windows box or I'm on a Mac, don't I have to go out and get like the Qt framework like you do now? Like if I want to do Pigeon on Windows, you have to go download, or the installer will download the GTK framework in the background. Right. So, yes, exactly. Well, now with a Qt app, is that the same thing? Like if you wrote a Qt comic book reader, there are of course going to be support libraries but the thing is, those can all be included with an installer. Okay. So you do have to include the Qt libraries for whatever platform.
There are some things that need to be included, but it's much easier to distribute them, at least from my experience. Okay. And so you can create it is easy to develop the installer, and it's easy to distribute the installer. Okay. And of course, if you're developing an application on Linux, you can just say have your
pull from the repo. If they don't already have
pull
it.
Qt from the repo.
But if they're running KDE4, they already have all this stuff.
They already have Qt. It's not Qt 4.5, but it's close, and in most things should be backwards compatible.
Qt 4.5 is probably coming to a distribution soon.
I would hope so. It is.
But like you said, you could also include the libraries yourself.
Yes. Okay. Absolutely.
Well,
so now,
and is it very much extra weight? Is it just like
No, it's not that much.
Okay.
No, it's not that bad. I mean, considering we're nowadays where, you go download most applications and they're 10, 20, 30 megs in size half the time.
Right.
This
Now,
is gonna be no
I know you
different
want
in
to
your
spend more time
Finder.
on Java later, but so the
Right.
advantage to this would be is, you have to include the libraries, but
Right.
if you give somebody Windows software and it's written in Qt Creator and it's all based on Qt, then when they run it, it's going to be native. It's not going to run inside a runtime like a Java app would.
It's a native. You develop it in C++. So
then you
compile
would
it to native code. You get native raw code.
So that would be
performance.
fast. So then it would theoretically also probably be a faster application than something you get in Mono, because Mono or
Yes.
.NET's still running in a runtime.
Right. You can do JIT compiled stuff in Mono, but that's a whole different topic we'll get into later.
Okay.
But yes,
That's
if
interesting.
you're looking for raw speed, you're looking for
So you
applications to look modern and native. This really is a nice way
So
to
you
go.
get cross OS development, you get native speed on that OS, and
Yes.
you get a native look and feel to that OS.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
It's a huge
and
deal.
it includes a lot of really nice tools to begin with anyways. So just
Yes.
outside of those benefits, the actual development environment is actually nice to use.
And the development environment's great. A lot of great autocomplete. The
That's
debugging is
sweet.
fantastic. It does good for. It has a lot of built-in stuff for project management. Those of you using Visual Studio or Eclipse are already used to a lot of the features it has. Then again, most development environments, with a few exceptions, have some great project management stuff built into
Yeah.
it. So integration with CVS and these sorts of things. But
what about
Qt,
Git? Just kidding. GIT, the Git instead of SVN. Okay, no.
Yeah, you can use Git.
Linus tells me it's great, Brian.
Yeah, no, it's Git. Git's fine. So is Bazaar if you want to use Bazaar. Anyway, all these things are great. Basically, what you want to walk away from this is Qt Creator does have a commercial version of it. The real big difference is commercial support,
Okay.
and you can get commercial support for that. And then, of course, there is
So it
the
doesn't change
LGPL
the software
version.
you can release. It just means you have
No.
1-800 number to call.
Essentially, and there's a lot more features that go along with it. I highly recommend, if you are developing commercial software, check out the services that Qt Software offers, because there is some really valuable stuff in there. But
if you wanna
you
build
just
an
need to
app-
get started, if you just want to
Yeah.
get rolling as a hobbyist or even as a corporation that's evaluating this as a tool or as an open source developer, I would have a really hard time not saying right off the bat that Qt Creator is the winner of this current roundup. And this is the first one that we've really talked about.
Looks like they have Qt Creator for Linux and for Mac, and they have it for Windows too, I
Yes.
assume, the actual
Yes, the
IDE.
actual IDE. So,
And then you
it's
could
the
develop for
same
any of those
code.
OSs on that
Yes.
same. So you could
Yes.
run Linux and develop for Windows and Mac.
Yes, and it should. Well, I mean, we're talking zero
That's
code
awesome.
changes here. Now we say in theory zero code changes.
Right,
Now,
there's
a
sometimes-
general thing that we're going to run across as we talk about all of these development environments is there's always going to be a gotcha.
That's
There's
why I always
going to
include
be a hang up.
I always have a Heisenberg compensator right inside the. Oh wait, that's my transporter. Never mind. Sorry.
No, actually, a Heisenberg compensator wouldn't
Yeah.
be bad to have in this scenario. But there's always an issue, like let's say file handling and things along those natures.
Right.
That's not too much of an issue with,
What about
with
like
Qt.
devices? I gotta imagine like even like accessing a USB device is gonna be different.
It's theoretical. If you're interfacing directly with device drivers and these sorts of things, they can get a little sticky and hairy. But for most applications, heck, even if you're dealing with, like, let's say a music management application, if you're dealing with syncing directly with a let's say, like, not necessarily an iPod, but let's say an Arcos Media jukebox or something like that, most of those devices mount as a drive anyway.
Right.
So really, what you're dealing with is minor changes to file directory structures, and Qt 4.5 and even previous versions offer a lot of functionality in that regard to help make that a lot easier between platforms anyway. Really, usually your code is going to be 99.9% exactly the same across platforms, and Qt Creator, wow, they did a phenomenal job. I got to give my hat to them. They did great.
All right.
We've got a lot of ones that we're going to go over. Next up, what I want to do is I want to compare Qt Creator to Flex, actually.
Whoa.
We're going to go kind of to the other side of the fence here, and we'll get into that in the next episode. We got a lot of stuff to cover.
Okay.
We're going to cover Java applications. We're actually going to cover Zool applications. We want to do Flex Air applications that can run on all three platforms. We got a lot of ground.
All
to
right.
cover.
I'm interested. I'm impressed with some of the Air apps I'm seeing. So
But
I'll
Qt
look forward to that.
Creator is phenomenal. It's Qt
There
is
you have
tried
it.
and tested. You can't really go wrong. I do recommend checking it out, even if you're a Linux GNOME developer or just a standard .NET developer. Give Qt a look, especially with the licensing changes and the new addition of the new IDE. wow. It's really hard to pass
perks.
up.
That's some nice
it's some
perks.
huge perks. For me personally, I'm looking at it thinking, wow, I wish I would have had this 6 or 7 months earlier. I probably would have done a few different applications in this environment. It's pretty phenomenal. So that's about all I have for this one.
That's kind of an endorsement right there. I'm
It's
impressed.
Now, we'll see how this stacks up. We are going to spend some time going in depth, and we're going to keep an open mind on all these different development environments, even if they're ones that I wouldn't normally use. Cross-platform, definitely write in and let us know. And you can, of course, head on over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/forum and discuss it in there. Give us tips, leave us little tidbits. You can also hit us up on Twitter, twitter.com/Brian with a Y-L-A-S.
And I'm Chris with LAS at the end. CHRISLAS. And
that's how it goes.
And that's a great way to send us tips, or if you have a suggestion for a future show, you can hit us up on Twitter or the forum, where there's always an active discussion. It's a great way.
And yes, right now we're drinking beer.
That is true.
Yes, because if you're doing software development of any kind, you need to be drinking alcohol.
Yeah,
you're a better coder.
Right.
If you're got a little.
You do documentation while you're sober, and you code while you've had a few drinks. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Or at least when you're on video talking about developing software. You seem cooler if you're drinking.
Or you're thirsty. All right, everybody. Well, I think that wraps up this episode of Cross Development and an in-depth look. Stay tuned, because we'll have another episode coming up looking at all the other crap Brian just talked about in a future episode.
All the other crap.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching, and keep it geeky.
This episode of An In-Depth Look is sponsored by GoDaddy.com, the world's largest host and domain name registrar. If you're ready to make an impact online, GoDaddy.com has got you covered. Domain names as low as $1.99, plus world-class hosting with unlimited disk space and bandwidth. Do-it-yourself website builders, dedicated servers, and SSL certificates, and so much more. Plus, as an in-depth viewer, enter promo code Linux20 at checkout and save an additional 20% off any 1, 2, or even 3 years website hosting plan. Some restrictions apply. See site for details. Get your piece of the internet at GoDaddy.com.